Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Austin Current, long overdue for a return to the podcast, the author of The Science of Strength Training. You've got a degree in exercise science, focus in sports nutrition. You're an IFBB pro, which I know you don't lean heavily on, but it's actually a pretty cool accomplishment. And you've written for a lot of the same stuff I have: muscle and fitness, men's health, T Nation, bar band. And we actually got to hang out in person. You presented at the Real Coaches Summit a year and a bit ago. It's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right. Quote, self-belief comes from keeping promises you make to yourself. End quote. Talk to me about this.
I have struggled with this across my life. You know, I in some ways I have struggled with it, in other ways I haven't. And I think this is particular to and specific to the domain in which it is in. And, you know, obviously how much I align with that thing. And this is a lesson that I really saw come to life of this cause and effect when I was competing. And this was all around the same time where I really switched gears in terms of my effort, I'll say, in my academic career and my intellectual pursuits. And I also was doing this around the same time. So I started competing when I kind of got into my second year of university. And, you know, I was not a great student by any means. And there's no mistaking that throughout basically everything leading into university. And university, I completely turned that around, got on Dean's List, never really got off of it. And, you know, was in an honor society academically and really just turned it around for myself. And I also, you know, was starting to compete at this time, and I was seeing that cause and effect. I was seeing the impacts of keeping those promises I was making to myself, no matter how small, no matter how big. As long as I kept my promise to myself, something came from it. And, you know, I have not been perfect, you know. My batting percentage there has fluctuated, we'll say, over my life and over my career. But what I will say to that is what I've noticed, especially professionally, personally too, but professionally in the context of this conversation, my professional career has advanced when I'm doing that more often, when I'm keeping those promises to myself more often. And I also, you know, just to kind of round that out, the more I'm asking of myself, the more promises I'm asking myself to make and keeping them also go hand in hand. They seem to have a linear relationship in my professional career and just life in general. So, you know, the less promises I keep to myself, the less I kind of ask of myself, because I don't want to let myself down to some degree. And that's me being as transparent and honest as I can be about that. So I don't bat 100% by any stretch of the imagination there. But I will say it seems to be a linear relationship with the promises that I keep to myself and the promises that I subsequently make then thereafter to then keep again. So there seems to be a good relationship there.
I think there's a couple things there. I think what you also alluded to was making sure that you're not over-promising because you don't have the capacity to do it. And it's curating, setting boundaries, saying no. And that you answered it first through a professional lens, but I mean, I think that extrapolates to life for anybody. But I also think it goes back into the narrower focus of fitness and nutrition. And I think the second thing that I always come back to, it's why I started with this question, is I think the danger is if we make a lot of promises, whether it's I say the word I promise, or we say we're going to do things, we don't frame it as a promise, and then we train ourselves that we break them. We don't follow through on a lot of these things. Then we train ourselves not to trust our own word. And that, I think, is the biggest consequence. And I think a lot of people get trapped there where they have such a track record strung together of, and I don't have any issue with someone trying, struggling, getting back up, trying again, even if there's gaps. Like, I believe in grace for that. But is the cumulative effect that even as you say you're doing, even as you may use the word I promise, deep down or even on the surface, you know you will break that promise to yourself. And if you're there, I think you really need a hard reset about this stuff, because I worry that people will not follow through.
There's this default response that we tend to have, right? Especially as, overachievers, ambitious people, maybe coinciding with some degree of ADHD, whatever that is. There's this sort of this answer, this default that we give on absolutely, I'll get that done, I promise. I'm kind of insinuating the promise within my acceptance of that responsibility. And again, like we all have limitations to bandwidth, and it kind of changes per the amount of time we have also to dedicate to those tasks, right? So, a couple years ago, I went back, or two, maybe almost going on 3 now. I went back to training clients in person 2 days a week, more full time, and that in and of itself now basically takes 2 full work days out of my week. And where I would have unlimited time, it doesn't really matter. This could be a 12, 14-hour workday on a Tuesday or a Thursday, but now I don't have that time to dedicate to all these projects or things that I was saying yes to. And now they're starting to push. Now I'm kind of have that conflict of them pushing into the weekend and then messing up weekend plans. And like, okay, I was asked to do this. I promised I would do it. Now I'm upset that I promised that I would do it. And now am I giving my all to this? And so it's just kind of trying to aggregate that or filter that through the actual bandwidth filter that I have right now versus the one I may have had in the past. And as you said, there does seem to be this cumulative effect of that self-esteem and self-confidence, and also, this confidence that the other people can have in you and trust that they can have in you. And, from a career development standpoint, trust and, reputation is kind of built off that trust. So if I'm continuously breaking that trust, then where are we at, there is some grace built in, but also how much, and how much should there be built in?
I don't think this is one of those questions that has a firm, okay, here's the obvious answer, here's a solution. I think this is better just bubbling this to everybody's surface consciousness, so that way they can stop and go, wait a minute, I'm struggling here. I need to think about this a little bit. So I do think it comes back down to boundaries. I think it is the triage of what's essential, what's important, what aligns with me. I think the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown is almost a masterful treatment of that. But I also suspect for a lot of people's lives, there's always a story embedded in this. I always like going to, what's the story you're telling yourself about why you did the thing or why you said yes to the thing? And I think a lot of people tell the story, well, I have to do this. I'm obligated to do this. I think some of it comes around family for sure. And then there's the story that, well, I want to take care of my health. I want to eat better, but all these other family things, these work things, these life things, the commitments that people make, those have to come first. So therefore you come last. And I think it's more, can you recognize within yourself where you're putting yourself last, where you're making promises that you're consistently breaking? Do you trust yourself? And what are you saying yes to that you have a story? This is essential. I have to do this. I'm obligated to do this, when maybe that's a story. And maybe you could actually say, no, this doesn't fit because I'm sacrificing me. There's a lot there.
Yeah. And yeah, there is. And I like this. I use this, the fitness dial example quite a bit. And, sort of this all or nothing. I sent an email out this morning. It's my email list about this too. And again, it's this concept I picked up from Eric Helms, to give him credit, back in 2017 when I was at a seminar over in Australia, when I was living over there, when JPS hosted with some of the 3DMJ guys. It was the collaboration between JPS and 3DMJ. And, this was kind of the first time I heard this, 2 analogies. One, the big rocks, the small rocks, the sand, kind of this big rock analogy with finding the most important things. But then also this more of this dial approach, rather than having a light switch that's all or nothing that turns on and off. We have this dimmer dial where, the light switch is the easiest way to kind of think about it, where, it's on. If the lights are on, they're on. And if the lights are off, they're off. But also there's an intensity to that light, right? So yes, the light is on, but yet dim. And also it's still on. So there's still effort there. There's still electric, to the metaphor, there's still electricity powering through, and there's some light to be had there. And so there's some effort, more in our fitness life. There's more effort, or there's more, there is effort in that, and there is intention in that. And therefore we're still on track to do something, to progress in something. And that is, to me, something that is unmistakably important, or undervalued in our fitness approach, right? And really, you've given this analogy as well through your content, but it's very similar to the compounding interest effect with investing. It's these small actions done consistently over time that compound and compound and compound, and end up becoming that physical retirement plan that we all hope for, when in reality, if we haven't prepared for it decades prior, it's probably not going to be there to the same degree that you imagine it to. And so again, that comes down to keeping the promise, but also understanding the bandwidth within that promise, and understanding that we all have a certain amount of bandwidth, but within that, what can I give? What should I allow to creep into this? What are the big pillars? What are the big rocks? And what promises can I keep on a more consistent basis? And as you build momentum there, being able to add on top of that over time, rather than biting off way more than you can chew, and then you fail each time. So,
and to that point, to draw it out a little bit, if you learn to trust that you can do it, you develop a greater capacity. I've seen this in my career, but I've also seen it in, fitness. I think most people can actually relate to this. What you look back and you realize what you're doing now that's pretty routine and I don't love the lens of productivity, but let's say through productivity of life and work, we can maintain standards now that seemed Herculean when we first started. And now we're anchored to that as our default setting. But what ended up happening over time is someone didn't just flip that switch and say, I'm this now. And it's almost like the James Clear Atomic Habits thing. It's, you generated proof that you were who you say you were by making these small votes, this compounding that you mentioned over time. All right, let's take this into, I like this. So there's a quote, again, I pulled from your media: matching good enough with things your clients enjoy is probably best long-term, opposed to what's optimal in the short term. Talk to me about this again from the user's perspective.
So again, this kind of goes into, there seems to be these thresholds for everything, right? So could you work 14, 15, 16 hours a day? Sure, you could, but do you need to? Could you also work 6 to 8 hours a day and achieve as much as you need to in that time, and still also leave room for all of the other valuable things in your life that are going to then feed into the success of those 6 to 8 hours, right? And so again, I'm not the biggest fan of pounding on productivity, but also there seems to be this concept that's sort of wrapped up in it, where we kind of mistake this perfection mentality and paralysis by analysis of trying to meet that perfectionism within all of us to some degree with, well, it must be more, it must be more, it must be more. And in reality, it's, again, we see this with the volume equation with weightlifting or strength training, resistance training, where, okay, we need a certain amount of volume we need to meet that threshold. More can be better, more is maybe better, and then more is now not better. And so there seems to be this, again, this law of diminishing returns in everything. And again, I am a firm believer that everything does exist on this continuum, and most things probably look like this inverted U, and in terms of a curve, right? So small effects, large effects in middle, and then back to a small effect within the diminishing returns on the other side, where, again, like there does seem to be this, I go back to a James Clear thing, there does seem to be this Goldilocks zone for all things, when we talk about stress and the stimulation of, or the arousal within that stress, and ability to kind of find our flow state, right? Or anything like that. Again, there seems to be this Goldilocks zone of, I need to be stressed enough, but not too stressed. I need to be stimulated enough within the gym, but not too stimulated. I need to do enough volume, but not too much. And so there always seems to be this relationship that lies within this continuum, or somewhere on this continuum. And from dependent on the person, like maybe you're shifted either direction, right? So there's sort of these there's these separations between individuals, right? This inter-individual variability where some people may need slightly less, some people may need slightly more, right? Some people respond to a slightly smaller deficit to where others, you really need to dig into a deficit to see that response. Everyone's a bit different, right? So these hard and fast rules and this perpetual need to do more, feel like we need to do more, we're not doing enough. I just don't align. Although I admittedly still struggle with this myself. And so a lot of these things are also, as we share a lot of these ideas over social media, a lot of them are ideas that we need to hear ourselves. They're conversations we're having in our own mind, and they're lessons we're trying to teach others and also trying to convince ourselves is also true. So that's a powerful thing. But there, again, kind of to circle back to where I started, there does seem to be this Goldilocks zone and this good enough threshold that if we're at least meeting that, okay, great. Now, what other things do we need to bring up to that good enough threshold that aren't there yet? And then once the things that kind of those big rocks are all at that good enough threshold, reevaluate. Okay, now what can improve? What do I have bandwidth for? And again, as long as things stay within that good enough threshold, we're managing calories well enough. We're doing enough cardiovascular training. We're doing enough strength training. We're sleeping good enough. We're managing our stress well enough. We're getting enough work done. We're spending enough time with our family and friends, filling our social needs. Like there's all of these things that, again, there's so many factors at play here that we can't possibly hit all of them 100%, right? There's just not everything, it lives on this dial, right? And every dial is having to readjust across the board, dependent on how much effort or bias we're intending to give to one or another. But each one does seem to need this threshold of, if I go back to finish here, to go back to that dimmer switch example, where again, there's this threshold that's necessary for that light to be on at all. No matter dim or bright, it as we shift that dimmer switch on that light switch, there is off and then there's on, right? And there's a threshold that needs to meet there, right? And to me, like if someone did that, it's like, yeah, that's good enough. I can see enough. And that's kind of that good enough threshold. And as long as we're there in the areas we need to be there in, okay, then we reevaluate and trying to improve from there. But I think start at the good enough.
A quick break from this episode to shout out RP Strength and the RP Hypertrophy app. I have a big confession. I've never used a coach before. I've always auto-regulated my training for decades. But I've known Dr. Mike Isotel and Nick Shaw, the founders of RP, for years, and I'll get behind anything they create, including years of reading their books, consuming their media, attending their seminars, and having them as guests on the show. And I've been using the RP Hypertrophy app now for several months. And several things have happened. It forced me to make smaller and more gradual but better increases in weight volume across time, like putting 5-pound plates on each side of a leg press. Like who does that? Never before. Only 45s. It cut out the junk volume. It made my workouts faster and more efficient. I show up with a plan. I didn't have to think about what to do. I feel more accountable having a log my progress. And I don't skip things because I don't feel like it. If hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to manage your gains and to take the guesswork out of your program. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free, and if you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. And I've also got you a $50 US dollar discount, so go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes. That's rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP. This shows up in training a lot. I keep thinking about this in terms of form because we have people who, right, little diatribe. The internet is not reality broadly. We see more and more, I've noticed social media has become parasocial. We're seeing more and more video that's, you don't have a relationship with this person. It just pushed out at you, versus say 5 years ago where you actually probably more interact with people you kind of knew, right? That's the nature of the algorithm. And especially within the fitness industry, I find in the hypertrophy space, this is particularly bad. When I see people who are making blanket absolute statements, and then they talk, and they're warring with each other over interpretations of research and optimization. It's not hard for me to tell who actually doesn't train people in person, right? Because from most of what I've seen, most of the stuff doesn't apply to the young guy who's just starting out, athletes, the perimenopausal woman, the mom, the older adult. It's lacking the nuance that all this requires. And it is still a status chasing, clout chasing war zone where I've said this in other places. If you heard me say it before, I apologize, but I think it's a good message to get in. But a lot of the battlegrounds that we see, it exists in nutrition, it exists in the physical therapy realm, it exists in hypertrophy. It's really bad. It's this Batman Joker dynamic. And it would be just like, why don't the people who are at each other's throats just block each other and pretend they don't exist? Because Batman doesn't exist without the Joker. Joker doesn't exist without Batman. And there's this symbiotic, reciprocal thing that everybody involved gains status. And depending on what tribe we're in, we see one person is the good guy, one person is Batman, one person is the Joker. But that relationship, the parasocial follower to hero guru relationship, is flipped for the other side's tribe, if you think about it, right? Same thing in politics. I'm not going near that, but right. So back to the optimal training stuff, because you're smart, Kate. Is there anything else in that realm that you see a lot of on social media that you're like, guys, this is not reality. You can pretty much ignore this. Here's what matters.
Yeah. Well, I think form is something, technique and form. Yesterday I actually saw a post from Lucas Hardy, range of strength on,
Yes. I had him on
Canadian.
a while ago. Fucking amazing dude.
Brilliant guy, and guy I highly respect his viewpoints on, and I've learned a ton from him, and just from following him and reading his stuff. And yesterday he gave a distinction between form and technique, and technique, being in this video is like, technique is kind of all those internal things that are going on, involving the how we're setting ourselves up, how we're going through that subsequent execution of that lift, all the internal cues that we're telling ourselves, all the things that are going on internally. And then form is this sort of this external manifestation that can be observed of, well, that's how that looks, right? So to say that, for example, I think this is the example that just came to mind, but I think it's helpful. If we pick on Lane Norton's squat, he has great technique in the squat, but his form to the uneducated or the ignorant looks abysmal, right? But he has good technique because he has very long femurs, a very short torso, and that's just how those people squat. My wife's the same. She's not built to squat. I am the exact opposite. I fold like a lawn chair. I look like an infant squatting. I can just bend down in that position. I fold easily, right? And so I squat really, really well. And so on the surface, my form, and again, like observationally, this even happened last week. I was squatting, and someone at my gym came up and was like, "Your form is just perfect, man." And I was like, "Well, I've been doing it a long time, and I've had a lot of intention to improve it and be good at it, but also my form's just my form. It looks that way because the way I'm built, my structure. Yours, I'm sure, is great. It just looks a little different, and that's okay." And so encompassing that conversation, there is this sort of threshold of good enough within form and the way that things look and appear. But I do think that is a helpful distinction that is certainly making me think and consider a lot of things around this conversation around technique and form and how we view it, because it's often that, and I will get to your question here in a second, I promise. But there seems to be this ongoing conversation and battle around form doesn't matter. Technique doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to, and it's usually in the form of, injury prevention or et cetera, et cetera. The stimulus you get from set lifting or whatever you want to kind of insert there. And, that's a point that I firmly disagree that it does matter. I really think it matters to a degree. And again, I made a recent post around like good enough technique, keeping technique good enough can help, for example, can help be a really good sort of scope on fatigue management, load management, right? So as soon as you start to have form breakdown, well, that's probably an indicator that we are highly fatigued under a lot of neuromuscular stress and fatigue. And, that goes down to the sort of the nervous system there. And how well are we actually coordinating those lifts now? Are we closer to injury? I would say probably. We can all logically get there as far as like, yeah, I was really tired. I pushed for another rep and that's when it happened. Right. And that's not always necessarily when it happens. But again, it's when you're, especially as an in-person trainer who sees all types of different bodies move on a weekly basis, you can start to see like, hey, well, cut it there. That was great. Good finish. Because you can just see like, that's not going anywhere productive, right? It's probably not leading to anything greater. It's just more fatigue that they're going to have to handle, while also probably closer to an injury than they otherwise would be if they would have stopped, right? And I'm not saying you're going to get injured. I'm just saying you're probably closer to one if you push past those points of that form breakdown, right? Or that, form, we use form there as form breakdown. And so again, and also if we look at all these, in most of these studies, ironically, most of them also go on to say in kind of an afterthought tail end to a sentence to finish off the sentence while maintaining good technique, while maintaining good form. And so although we parasocially talk about it doesn't matter, it also finds its way in almost all of these studies to one way, shape, or form, and almost in everyone's articles. And I often have this conversation around, I think if I was in person with each one of these individuals who say it doesn't matter, I think we could both strongman each other's arguments and say, I think we agree on 90% here. I think we agree that it does matter to some degree, but there are caveats and contexts in which, and nuance within which it doesn't. And I think we'd also agree on that. So I think we'd probably maybe above 90% in our understanding of that, or in our agreement of that. I'm going to pause there. I do want to answer your question to another, kind of answer your question there, but I wanted to pause and see if you had any notes on that.
There's a ton here. You mentioned load management, and I've always seen, so yeah, anybody who's saying that there's no relation between form and injury risk, I'm like, I understand that from a data side of things, but, and then they go on to say it. And I think there's something here that like load management is your main driver of injury risk in this context. There's a long list. That's a different conversation. Mm-hmm. But to me, if the form is breaking down, I'm paraphrasing you, if the form is breaking down, it's a sign that we violated load management. So is the form the problem, or is the load? And that could be the literal weight or the amount of sets, the amount of reps, the combination of that stuff. So that to me is a good sign. There's another thing here, and it almost contradicts, but I'll bring it up anyway. There's two things on our line. One is as we get heavier and heavier into, powerlifting maximal territory. I was arguing with Squat U, and I normally don't do this, but Squat U has put up a post, and there's a lot of fluff there. Sorry guys. It's just, he says a lot of dumb shit. And was making some sort of statement about how like, a max rep, I can't remember the exact wording, so I don't want to be uncharitable, but that the heaviest reps should look the same as light reps. That's bullshit. You've ever trained anybody in person, you watch competitive powerlifters, your one rep max, for most people, the form is going to look different. Now, for those powerlifters, for those athletes, and this goes into my second point, have they trained to load tissue in those positions over time? So that way they're resilient, you actually have, and then it becomes a skill to be able to lift within variation on form. I think you can violate that and get hurt pretty easily. And then the second piece that's adjacent is there are certain disciplines. I wouldn't necessarily say the gym is somewhere where you want to necessarily train yourself too far into fatigue, you want to build fatigue. You want to train yourself to maintain form through fatigue. Yes, absolutely. But if you get into, I think, mixed martial arts, so Joel Jamison's course goes into this. And there's a really strong argument here. Almost any sport athletic pursuit, there's a lot of fatigue that accumulates acutely or chronically, like let's say for, a play, particular deeper into a round in a fight or across an entire match or a game. And if you're not robust and resilient and be able to train to try to maintain form or be able to tolerate degraded form technique as you fatigue a lot, then you are subjecting yourself to more injury risk. So there becomes an aspect of, do you train to tolerate movement under fatigue? And yes, a big key part of that is to maintain technique during that fatigue.
Yeah, work capacity and resilience both kind of hand in hand with that, right? And so I was having a conversation yesterday, and kind of with the training to failure post that I shared on my story, and I was kind of walking through my observation, belief, theory that a sign of a more advanced lifter, a higher training aged lifter, to me, in my observation, seems to be someone that can withstand form, technique form in face of that fatigue, and they can maintain that, and they start to increase the gap between that point where reps start to feel hard and that point of momentary muscular failure. Like that seems to be, so like for a lot of the clients that I trained in person, very gen pop, very similar to yourself, just your average gym goer who's somewhere between the ages of 45 and 70, who just is in there to be healthier. And I've noted, and not a ton of experience with lifting, as soon as rep speed, as soon as velocity we start to lose velocity in those reps, the speed of those reps, I can almost guarantee towards the beginning of that person's training, they either have one, potentially two more reps left in the tank. Mm. That is their 8 RPE. That is their 1 to 2 RAR. And as soon as those reps really actually start to slow down visibly to me, they're done in a rep or two, like almost automatically. And as we work together, that seems to grow. Now, once we start to see velocity loss, maybe they get 3 more, maybe they get 4 more, right? And this happened the other day. I had a client, one of my in-person clients was in the leg press, and things started to really slow down. And I was like, okay, we got 1 or 2 more here. They got 5. And that to me, again, but towards the beginning of working together, that would have been probably 1 to 2 reps left in the tank. But now it's 4 or 5 reps left in the tank. Okay. Was that a one-off thing? Was that just like they saw the light and pushed through? Or is this actual progressive overload actualizing in real time, like observational overload and adaptation, actualizing in real time? And I would say, yeah. I mean, that is their body adapting, becoming more resilient, having a higher work capacity. It's their nervous system's ability to continue to recruit high threshold motor units. It's their nervous system's ability to keep sending that signal at a high rate, a fast enough rate to continue to contract. And also their ability to contract and relax on either side of that joint. And so again, like their efficiency is improving, their work capacity is improving, their resilience is improving as a lifter. And again, that is a skill that is developed to kind of go along with this conversation more globally.
There's one more lens that I think you brought up, the differentiation between technique and form, that I think is really helpful. I think through the lens of externally looking at how form presents, for the casual person, it's probably not a good indicator of whether someone else is going to get hurt. Inexperienced trainers see something that deviates from their idea of artificial standard of form, and they go, oh, let me go help you. You're going to hurt yourself. You don't know their injury history. You probably don't have a good enough grasp on the difference of anthropometry, limb lengths. You alluded to that with Blaine Norton. Excellent example. So that's the exterior presentation, as you said. But when you look at through the lens of technique, and I may be paraphrasing something you already said, it's technique matters for muscle recruitment, which means it matters for the muscles you're stimulating and strengthening, and therefore the results of muscle building. I mean, to a point, I think when people get really granular and, let's say a rowing type motion, then, someone's arguing about the recruitment of, what is rhomboids versus lats versus rear delts. And yes, we can influence that stuff in a few ways. But for the beginner to intermediate person who's probably not trying to stand on a bodybuilding stage, I just want them to get stronger in a row. I want them to not experience any pain. I want them to feel confident. I want them to progress week over week. And there's a pretty good chance that all those muscles are going to grow, right? So it becomes a point like, who is in front of us? How much does some of this stuff matter? And I like the Goldilocks analogy about form, because you do this long enough and you said something, and it's like when you just kind of know, it's pattern recognition. You can't speed through. The inexperienced trainer can't get the reps all in one shot. You actually have to train people to see this. And I can't count the number of times where we've all done this, where we swear we see that the form is going to break down a bit before it does, because the pattern recognition of having seen so much of this, the speed, the slowdown in speed, our brain perceives it before we're almost consciously aware of it. And next, we've issued that quick cue that we notice that they tighten up, right? So that's pattern recognition, which again comes from experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a great point to bring up there. And, for an example, that's very relatable, I think, for most of us is, let's say you're doing a dumbbell bench press, you're getting, that fatigue is accumulating, you're getting further and further into your set, closer and closer to failure. You're keeping things, let's say, tight in a more neutral position. And as soon as that velocity loss starts to happen, there's that point where your elbow just starts to shoot up. Maybe not both, but there's always that, maybe one arm that tends to creep up, and you tend to start to sink into yourself and start to really adjust, right? And again, you kind of know it's coming, right? And so when I see that velocity loss, that's when I'll say, hey, stay tight here, stay tight here, stay tight here. And just don't let that elbow come up. Don't let that elbow come up. And it's that reminder of reminding the client on, hey, remember our technique, remember those internal cues. Hey, stay tight, stay tight. I'm sort of rehearsing those for them so they become more programmed within them. And I think the more advanced you get as a lifter, we have these scripts that play on certain movements of, okay, keep the elbow position here, keep elbow position here. Okay, stay tight here, stay tight here, stay tight here. Keep pressure here, keep pressure here, in a squat or whatever. Or don't let hips shoot up, don't let hips shoot up in a deadlift or something, where you kind of have these scripts that play out in your mind, but we weren't born with those, right? We learned those. And, when I was much younger, a script that was constantly in my mind that I was taught when squatting was head up, head up, head up, look at the ceiling, look at the ceiling. That's a script that I've had to get rid of as I've gotten older, because it doesn't serve me anymore. I found it to not be as beneficial for me. And I go with more of a neutral gaze rather than looking up, right? And I now learned through my experience and education that cue wasn't in bad fit, wasn't really poor advice generally, but specific to me, it probably was, because I'm not someone that struggles. As we talked about, I squat like an infant. I don't struggle with keeping my chest up in the squat. So honestly, I'm overcompensating by arching my back now and keep trying to keep my chest artificially higher than it needs to be, because for those that have longer femurs, they tend to be more of a bent over good morning squat, like a Lane Norton. Well, he may benefit from a cue similar to that, maybe not as drastic, but a cue similar to that to maybe help keep his chest a bit higher, not collapse into himself and under higher fatigue, higher loads. And so again, just because you've heard a cue, just because a cue might work for someone doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just is. And it may help them, right? And that's the power of reps as a trainer, where I've gone through so many of these scripts where I have some scripts in my mind. I have some scripts that I'm always augmenting and adjusting. And I'm trying to teach a client how to hinge, for example, or how to squat. And I'll kind of start with my general script, how to set it up, how to think about it. That doesn't relate to them. Okay. Let me go back to the drawing board. Let me think. What about this? Does this make sense? Kind of? Okay. What if I add this layer to it? Does that make sense? there it is, clicked. They have an aha. They're that eureka moment of like, that makes sense. Got it. Never heard anyone say it like that. It's always, it's saying the thing they've always thought, but no one's ever put words to it before. And now it clicks. Now it's the puzzle piece they need to fill that hole in their, metaphorical puzzle of lifting weights now, where, okay, now that makes sense. So again, cues aren't always bad. And those internal cues we need, the scripts, those are the scripts we run. And again, you with more experience, you start to learn where these things start to happen. And observationally, you can just say, that's coming. Like I can watch someone squat and be like, they're going to do this. 2 reps. I bet this happens. And it may happen, it may not, but I've seen it so many times where I'm like, that's probably going to happen.
A quick sponsor break for my current aspiring coach listeners. This episode is brought to you by Train Heroic. If you know me, you know I only work with sponsors I use personally and where I know the people behind the product. Train Heroic is the best online coaching software in the industry. Not only is it a great platform for one-on-one coaching, it's fantastic for group coaching and selling standalone programs. Train Heroic is used by some of my trusted friends, so I switched my online group program here, and my members love it, raving about its ease of use. Having a dedicated app means far greater reliability for my clients and has been by far my best experience with any online coaching software. Train Heroic is a proven and stable industry leader, meaning it isn't going to suddenly disappear. One of the biggest risks in choosing an online coaching software. When you start a free trial today, you'll get 90 days free to experience why I love and trust this platform. You'll get full support from their team, who've been a joy for me to work with. And I trust Train Heroic and the people behind it. Here's how to activate your free 90-day trial. It's 2 important steps. Number 1, go to www.trainheroic.com/liftfree. Step 2, reply to the email you get. It should be trials@trainheroic.com, and let them know I sent you, or go to the links in the show notes. Now you got me thinking about Nick Winkelman's book, The Language of Coaching. I'm going to have to bring Nick back and go into this stuff. And it's
I have that right back here. It's a great book.
It's on the shelf behind me a lot. It's right there on the edge. What are these? Language coaching. Great.
Yeah.
But no, so you made me think of some cues. And to your point, cues aren't going to be universal to everybody, but 2 quick thoughts. If I'm trying to affect someone's posture in a big lift and I want to affect their head position, I like to actually get their eyes to fixate on something, because where the eyes go, the head tends to go. I find that actually quite helpful, right? And that may be a little more up or a little more down, depending on the way they work. One of my favorite cues, if I'm trying to keep someone's chest up, chest open or whatever, because those work, they can work, but I like Care Bear stare. And everybody of our generation widely knows what that means. And it creates this automatic, like you intuitively know what that means. And Nick gets into some of these examples, like these external cues and metaphors that like they bypass our conscious processing, so that way our body just automatically does them. They process faster. They tend to work better on average. It's a big crux of the book. But I like Care Bear stare. There's lots of other different references, right? And a lot of coaches listening are kind of going, oh, I do this, or oh, I do this. And
Yeah.
Jonathan Goodman always talks about broom bum. If you've ever read any of his books, he always mentions this lady, the story, teaching her how to Romanian deadlifting broom bum. That's what he called the exercise. All good. Okay, one last thing with the time we've got. You just put up a post about 2-a-day training sessions. Now, I think most people don't have time for 2-a-days, let alone like 1 every day. But I definitely know people who want to go in twice. One of my closest friends for a while just had a lot of extra time after a relationship breakup, and he was going to the gym 2-a-days. The problem was too much intensity. And of course, I warned him. It's like, you're going to get hurt. Sure enough. But pros and cons, potential issues with 2-a-day training for the people who think, well, I want to train more, or maybe they're the person who just wants to break up a workout. Can you break up a workout and do one part of it in the early part of the day and one part later?
Yeah, it seems to be effective, and it seems to be more effective for those who are training more intensely with higher volumes, that have higher training ages. It does seem to be beneficial, and I know Steve Hall used it from Revive Stronger. He was using it for a long time. He would train twice a day, and I don't know if he's still doing that now. I don't think he is, but for the longest time, he went through an entire bodybuilding prep, if I'm not mistaken, doing this twice a day training. And so that would be an interesting guest to maybe talk to about this.
He's my next booked guest. I don't know
Wow.
what order I will air the episodes in, but he is actually booked for next week to record
Awesome.
with. So you guys listening, it's possible I'll probably air yours first, but you may be getting Steve right in the next or shortly thereafter. We'll see.
Yeah, no, that'd be a great question to ask him. But as far as what the research has to say on it, again, it seems to be effective. The post was in context to a client. A lot of my posts have come from client questions and topics that I'm discussing with my clients in our check-ins. And I have a client, probably half of my rosters are parents. And one is a parent of young kids and, is the main stay-at-home caretaker of these kids. And so there is times where she can do the entire session all at once. And so for her, we split it up. We have at-home training. She has a home gym with a few items that can get the job done. And then she also goes to the gym a couple times a week because she enjoys using the machines and the cables, a little bit more specificity and variety within the exercise selection. And so we have these kind of programmed out 2 sessions a week are going to be planned to be at home because that makes sense for her schedule. And then 2 of these other sessions are going to be at the gym because that makes sense for her schedule because her husband can now share the load of watching the kids while she goes and does that. And so, this client came to me and asked, hey, I was able to get in so we start that session off with a barbell reverse lunge. And she got that in. And then she said, hey, sent a message in the app and just said, hey, I had to cut this short. I had to run. My kid needed me. But I came back later on and finished my, Romanian deadlifts and these movements and these more, I finished with the single joint stuff. And she was like, I just, it felt nice. It actually, my Romanian deadlifts, my strength improved on those because I wasn't seemingly dealing with the fatigue carryover from the barbell reverse lunge, which is a highly fatiguing exercise. And so she was like, is that okay? Like, can I do that? And the answer is, yeah, you absolutely can. And it seems to be just as effective. Again, as long as you're reaching that thresholds, as long as you're reaching that threshold of you've probably done at least a couple of hard sets on that thing, you've probably met the threshold demand for that on that given day. And it doesn't seem to have an issue if you break that up. And again, if you're a more advanced trainee and you just love, you've been bitten by the iron bug. Again, when I was younger and I was training with, I would say arguably the most volume, I probably fell into, if we're taking like delt volume and chest volume and that sort of thing, I probably was 40 sets a week. Probably. I'm honestly, like I probably was because every day was delt day. Like I'm just training delts, dude. And I had some sick delts and I was recovering from that. But I also was also training usually on twice a day. I would go in the morning and lift, and then I'd go in the afternoon and lift, and then do some conditioning stuff because that's the way my life was. That's how I worked at a gym. I was going to school that had, a gym on campus, and like there was always a gym around me. And so when I had a spare hour, rather than sitting there scrolling my phone, I was like, I'll just go in for a lift. I feel good. I'll just go in for a lift. Great. And again, I was doing these really high volume, high intense programs. And to get that work in, I just needed to split it up. But again, like the recommendation is very contextual to you. And again, like there seems to be these good enough thresholds. So if you're someone who's barely struggling to get in 2 to 3 lifts in general across the week, then don't even think about this. Don't worry about it. But if you also train at home and you're like, hey, I can wake up, I have 30 minutes here in the morning and 30 minutes in the evening, but I don't have a full hour, then yeah, use the 30 minutes and make an hour. And we see this within the research of, exercise snacks, right? These small bouts of exercise that do seemingly have a very positive response on our health and well-being and all-cause mortality. So again, I think we overthink this thing a lot. And at the end of the day, are you providing stimulus to your tissues? Are you providing stimulus to your body? And within that Goldilocks zone that's trainable and recoverable? And if so, it doesn't really seem to matter if we're putting that all at once or kind of breaking it up. And again, the more advanced you are, the more specific to the domain or sport or activity or competition you're training for, that's going to start to matter more. But if you're just a general lifter who's trying to improve their health and well-being and muscular and strength and bone mineral density and all of those wonderful things that it does, cognitive health, we could go down the list, just train. And whenever that happens, it happens. Enjoy it, train hard when you're there, and have fun.
Love it. I think this shows up in a couple contexts that you more or less covered. One is it does come up with, especially the women in my group program, they'll often ask, can I go back and finish a workout later? And the answer depends, like, absolutely, it's totally cool. Or sometimes I'll ask, hey, can I do this the next day? Sometimes I'll actually just say to them, listen, just, you did what you could. A partial workout is better than no workout. Let's just do tomorrow's workout on its own as is without the pressure to fit this thing in. It's contextual.
Yeah.
And then I think about the Arnold, Arnold, at least anecdotally, and his contemporaries for some of their lifting career, they would do 2-a-days. And their recovery habits were questionable sometimes. It might be smoking and having beers out for lunch or whatever. And whenever you're dealing with a pro bodybuilder on the enhanced side of things, because you want a natural pro card, but there's also greater recovery capacity. Now, the flip side of that is, in order to be able to do progressive amounts of volume, if you're an advanced lifter, the only way to be able to do that and recover managed fatigue is to actually increase your number of sessions, your frequency. And that could mean morning training, evening training. At least in the Arnold context, and those bodybuilders, they were usually doing, it might be a chest workout in the afternoon and a back workout at night, or legs or something. So they tend to split it up for what they were training. And I used to always sort of think that, can I do part of my chest workout, full chest workout early and then more of it later? And I would think logically, no, that's bad, because I'm now interfering with the recovery process has already started. So therefore now I'm breaking down tissue again. And I think there may still be something that I wouldn't, if your workout structure is the hardcore, I try to put on muscle, you're doing a body part split, would I probably go and do half of my chest workout in the morning and half in the evening? I probably wouldn't. But I think when it comes to full body exercise, if you're rotating things or you're doing 3 workouts a week and you're trying to fit it in, guess what? 0 issue. That's my logical interpretation.
Yeah. And there's a lot of redundancies within the body, right? The pathways, we're filled with redundancies in terms of systems and pathways. And again, it's not like there's one pathway that leads towards recovery only, right? There's so many pathways and redundant pathways that, hey, if that one's being used, we'll use this one and we'll go that route. We'll detour. Hey, there's side roads here. We can take the interstate shut down. We're going to take some service roads, whatever example you want to use. Our body's filled with those. And the last point I want us to add to that, because you brought up a great point. And the other that reminded me of this, the other point that I made to her was something you need to account for is your physical and psychological readiness for the second session, right? Because you've gotten yourself stimulated and I'm excited. Let's say I use the word aroused because that's what's in the research, but obviously we use arouse for different things. And so, you're ready, you're amped up for that session. You have your physical readiness, you're warmed up, you're psychologically ready for that session. And that second session, just remember that, hey, you're going to need to kind of do that again. I need you to be ready for that second session too. So don't walk in and think that you're going to do this high intensity work without the proper, warm up or that whatever you need to do to get psychologically ready for this. And again, if it's too late, then maybe you're not in that state. I'd much rather you push this, whether we push it off or we just kind of chalk it up as like, hey, that is what it is this week. Let's just go ahead and just be sure we do it next week, sort of thing. So again, there tons of context and nuance as there always is, but 2-a-day training. If you want to do it, if it fits, great. If you don't and it doesn't, that's great too.
Beautiful. Everybody can follow you at Austin Current _. That's different. There must be some other Austin Current.
An Austin, Texas-based newspaper that hasn't posted since 2014.
Oh, that's painful.
Yeah.
Obviously, people can go pick up a copy of the Science of Strength Training, Yellow Book, lots of graphics. Like it's super cool. A lot of anatomy in there. Anything else you want to point people to?
No, man. Yeah, just I'm on Instagram. Follow me there. Hang out. Ask me questions. I'm there to answer questions and to help. And the book is, again, usually around $12. So if again, it's hard to say it's wasted money. You're likely going to pick up something, and if anything, it's a beautiful book for at least your kids to flip through and maybe use as a coloring book. So, whatever.
Thanks, my friend. I appreciate having you on. Everybody
Appreciate you.
listening, go follow Austin. And if you enjoyed this, you can think of somebody who would share it with them. You help me grow the podcast, reach more people, keep my sponsors happy. Go show some love for my sponsors. Thanks, Austin. Have a great
Thanks,
day,
man.
brother.